Hey, my name is Mark Ray.
And I am Zach Desjarlais.
And welcome to edX, a semi-regular discussion of educational technology. So, Zach, where were you in 1998?
In 1998, I was a sophomore in high school.
You are so young.
Yeah, well.
So what were you doing as a sophomore in high school?
I think, high school stuff, but it's interesting. I was probably watching Friends. That was a big 90s thing as well, right?
Yeah, remember that?
As far as technology in high school, didn't have a lot, no. But one of the things I do remember is my parents, I really wanted a Discman. I had a Walkman that I actually got from selling enough candy bars when I was in middle school, but I wanted a Discman. And my parents didn't buy me one. Instead...
Is it pronounced Discman or Discman?
Discman?
Okay.
I'm not sure.
So you've got kind of a continental pronunciation of Discman.
There you go.
That's a Discman, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah,
Discman.
yeah.
Anyway, you wanted a Discman.
I did. And they didn't give me one. They got me something called a Sega CDX.
Sega. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it played Sega cartridges, Sega CD.
So like gaming things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And audio CDs. And it was about the size of a, loaf of bread, maybe a little bit smaller than that. So smaller than a Sega system, but it played everything. One of the unique things about it is it had a spot in the back where you could put in like 14 batteries, probably $20 worth of batteries at the time. And then you could hook headphones to it, and it was a portable CD player.
So it was a multifunction device.
Yeah. Years ahead of its time. Yeah. Anyway, the funny thing about it is I would carry that thing everywhere with me. So in a sense, I made my own Discman.
Did you have like a strap that goes around your neck?
I did. I had
really?
It was like a CD carrying case that I took the CDs out of and put it in, and I'd have to strap it to my body because if you looked at it wrong,
it's got to be a sexy look.
Or even like breathe on it, it would skip. It was terrible on that front.
So it wasn't really a mobile device.
No, but I made it a mobile device.
Yeah.
And how about you? Where were you in 1998?
I was in Belgium actually. I had a gig teaching at the International School of Brussels.
Yeah.
And I was the head of libraries, and
so we were in very different spots.
Yeah. You're again reminding you're a little younger than I am. So yeah, it was kind of a culture shock actually, because I'd come from teaching in the United States in Vancouver. And we had just opened up Discovery Middle School, and that was the first middle school in our district that had every kid had their own accounts, like network accounts. Yeah. It was the first time we ever actually had file sharing for students, and then every kid had access to the internet, which in 1985 was kind of quaint. I mean, it's nothing like the internet is today. And the biggest problem we had with those kids was that they would, at that time, The Simpsons was really popular, and so they would download these little icons of Simpsons things, and they would fill up the small amount of storage space that they have in their file structure. And so that was one of my jobs, was to police the files so that they weren't putting too many Simpsons icons in their file folders. And I just think now about how quaint that would be. Wouldn't it be nice that if it was just Simpsons pictures
That's right.
in the file things? So we're talking about 1998 because that is the year that the first national educational technology standards came out. And that was ISTE, International Society for Technology and Education, which is actually based here in Eugene, Oregon, originally started in Eugene, Oregon. And anyway, they came out with these ed tech standards, and it's kind of hard to think about that far back in time, but at that time, Bill Clinton was president. The internet was just kind of emerging as a force. We had tools like this digital camera here, beautiful technology from Canon here, probably like 1 megapixel.
That's right, 1 megapixel, that's correct.
With a zoom. And then I actually had a version of this. This was the Newton message pad, and this was mobile technology a la middle 90s. The message pad 2000.
Smaller than my CDX.
Yeah. Yeah, but probably a little more stable.
It probably was, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, technology was really different. I mean, Netscape was had just that was the browser of choice at the time, and I think, as I recall, it was around the time that the browser wars were going on.
Oh, absolutely. Between Netscape and Internet Explorer.
So were you an Explorer guy or a Netscape guy?
I originally would have been a Netscape guy, but I didn't have access to computers at that age, really. Not much, at least.
At school and home?
Both, yeah. There were a few in our library, but no. At home, I remember we didn't get our first. I believe it was a HP, if I remember correctly, and huge, gigantic, bubbly thing, but it wasn't
bubbly. Did you say bubbly?
Bubbly, like it was bubble screen, like this big brown, and we didn't get that until my junior year. I remember my junior year I got that. Yeah, as a family too. It wasn't even mine.
Yeah, I mean, we take for granted now having devices at home, and knowing that a lot of kids may not have devices at home, but the fact that just about everybody has a smartphone and devices access, and it's pretty amazing change. DVDs came out in 1997. That was the first time that DVDs were available, and then I think you found the information that Google Docs emerged. It wasn't until 2009 actually that came much later.
Yeah. So if you look at that, Google didn't start as a company until 1998.
That's the point. That's it. Yep.
And then the Docs, which we would take for
later.
granted now. Wasn't until 10, 11 years later.
Yeah. So the idea to Google something wasn't even in our lexicon in 1998.
Yeah.
So I guess I mean, as we look at those original standards that ISTE came out with, the National Educational Technology Standards, I mean, what was the focus of those? I mean, what were you seeing?
Yeah, it's interesting. So that first round of net standards or ISTE standards was really about learning to use the technology. The technology was new, and it was really about how do you use it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until another 9 to 7, 8, 9 years later when NET revisited those standards in 2007, and they really started to change the focus of just technology and how to learn it to how to use technology to learn.
Yeah. And I know that I remember we had some Washington State ed tech standards that were kind of, I think, somewhat based on the ISTE standards, but they were really focused on keyboarding, to being able to use a keyboard, and how to format a floppy disk, and how to use a CD-ROM to access information. So it was very much kind of skills based.
Very skill based, yeah. How to.
Yeah. Which the fact is, I mean, since you didn't even have a computer at home until that time, I mean, that was a necessary skill.
Yeah, it's very much, technology was very foreign, I think, in the education setting up to that point. To be able to use it in a transformative or just a integrated, seamlessly way. Yeah.
But your Sega product, that was transformative for you.
Oh, it was for me. Yeah, I could mow the lawn and listen to about every other word on a CD.
Sweet. That's important. So, the reason we're kind of talking about the ISTE standards is because over the last several years, ISTE has revised their technology standards for students and have really kind of evolved those. And here in Washington State, we actually have adopted the ISTE student standards for the new ed tech standards. So rather than kind of creating something from scratch, we've really recognized the great work that ISTE has done and have adopted those student standards. And that was just done last spring, I believe, here in Vancouver Public Schools. Actually, we had the kickoff, and those were adopted. So I know, Zach, you're doing some work outside of the student standards. What are some of the different standards? ISTE's got lots of standards. So there's student standards in terms of what students are supposed to be able to be doing, but then there are some other standards as well.
Absolutely. And I think one of the big changes we start seeing is in ISTE, and even in 2007 when they started to kind of change their focus for technology to learn, is really now they're launching this movement is that technology can be transformative. So how do we use that in the context of learning? And along with that, they aren't just focusing on student standards. They've moved into educational leadership standards. They've moved into coaching standards. They even have computational thinking standards to help align and push this transformation that's happening in in education.
Yeah. So it seems to me like there's a lot of kind of this trying to hold a crystal ball and trying to figure out what the future looks like.
Yes.
And so I guess, from your perspective, you do work with our instructional technology facilitators here in Vancouver. You kind of oversee that work. You've been doing a lot with professional development. So, what are some of the kind of shifts that you're seeing with respect to what we expect teachers to do?
Yeah, it's a big shift. I think at one point, the teacher had all the knowledge, and there was a big component of that position to bestow their knowledge on their students. And now, with the way technology and Google, right? We can Google it.
Yeah.
Is you can search anything you want, find anything you want, with really strong resources too. So the lens starts to change a little bit for a teacher, and that's very, very difficult. If you think about your own experience and even careers or positions you may have had, there isn't many out there, if any, that I could think of, where you get to be a participant in that position before becoming a practitioner if you become a teacher. So not only are you trying to shift your practice with these new tools coming out, but you're also trying to shift years and years, 12, maybe 16 years of experience when these new tools and practices come out.
I think you're doing some work with principals too. So I mean, I think that's. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
What are they saying?
Yeah, and the same thing. There is years as a principal. You become a teacher, really effective teacher, and then you become a principal, and then you're in this leadership role, and you are the one who's supposed to have the keys and ideas and understanding of how all this work fits together. And a lot of times, these principals and other educational leaders don't have the context from teaching in the classroom with these tools and resources when they were there. That's a struggle for them. Great administrators really wrestling with the idea how to best support their staff and their students with these new tools.
Yeah, and the teachers, I'm sure, face that same challenge. I'm
absolutely
going down to Dallas tomorrow, actually, and going to do a keynote. And one of the things I'm going to do as a warm-up activity is to kind of do that. We're going to do a survey and actually ask the participants which of the tools have you used in your professional practice, and I'm going to include typewriter, CD-ROM player, and so on. And I think one of the challenges for educators is that we have this lens based on what we learned, our experience as learners, but also kind of if we've been teaching for a while, this priority around thinking about what have we seen students do up until now.
Sure.
And I think one of the things that I like about the ISTE standards is that they kind of look at that idea of what is a digital age student, a digital age learner, and I think that's really important. One of the other things that I think is kind of interesting, I've been reading about this idea of Generation Z.
Yeah.
So the students that are in our schools right now are not millennials.
No.
In fact, I think we assume a lot about the behavior of younger generations, and the millennials in most cases are the teachers now.
Exactly. Yes.
And they're the principals, and so those biases and assumptions are kind of connected to the previous generation, and I think we forget that Generation Z is a little bit different.
Absolutely.
And you've got kids. So,
do.
What are you seeing? I mean, what are some examples of that with your kids?
They're so resilient and intuitive. Our kids, I will constantly put my frame of reference of either now or when I was a kid their age on them, and they constantly surprise me with the understanding of the world, technology specifically. But it's a different. This might be trite, but we live in a different world, right? And they very much are.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that too. I'm really impressed. I've got some. We don't have kids, but we have some friends with adolescents, and the girl, she has her own. I think she has her own YouTube channel, and is just. And none of this has anything to do with school. She's not learning this when she goes to school. She's doing it when she goes home. Yeah. And so they're really savvy when it comes to their brand and creating products and communicating in an online environment. Much more so than even the millennials, I think.
Yeah.
You talk about friends, and it's like that's a millennial sort of mindset.
So. Yeah.
And by this time, they're already grandparents in some cases.
Absolutely. It's incredible. We have a couple devices that are kind of shared around our household, and even this last weekend, good colleague of ours, Eddie Sawyer, and I were on the couch watching football, and my 2-year-old 2-year-old, he's only 2, had grabbed an iPad and logged in. He got past the passcode, logged in. He can't talk. You know, he can say "Where's Mama?" That's his phrase. But and found the PBS app, pulled it up, found I think it was Wildcrats he was watching, and started watching it. I mean, it's crazy. You know, I think of even like working sometimes with my parents. They struggled to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, I've got an 87-year-old mother-in-law, and she does have an iPad. She's and on a pretty regular basis, she calls my wife for technical support because, of course, something's not working, and so she needs some technical support for that. So what we want to do is kind of think about this idea of ed tech standards, and a couple of reasons. One, these are national standards that are really outstanding, but here in Washington State, there also are ed tech standards, and so we're gonna hopefully kind of kick off, I guess, kind of a look at what those are, and then hopefully in the future episodes kind of look at each of those in some detail. There's a couple of shifts I know, as both you and I work with these standards on a regular basis. So there's a couple of definite shifts, I think, that these standards have with respect to what students are doing and what teachers are expected to be doing in the classroom.
Yes.
So I know you've got one that you kind of want, it's kind of top of your mind.
For
like as far as the shifts.
So I think one of the big shifts that we're seeing, and then this is spelled out in all the ISTE standards, is around I would say probably 2 things: choice and creation.
Yeah.
And I would say in at least 6, if not all 7 of the standards, there's a lot of choice. And by choice, I'm really getting at this idea that it's student directed.
Yeah.
And with that comes some level of creation. I was telling Mark this story the other day, and there was a show I was watching or something listening to on NPR, and this gentleman was talking about why he went and watched the original Star Wars 11 times.
Yeah. So you weren't born at that time.
I was not.
And,
I was not.
And for the record, I was. Yeah. I didn't watch it 11 times, but I did see it in a theater.
Yeah, and in my mind, that I've never lived in that world where this was an issue. And the reason why he went and seen it 11 times is because there wasn't another way to watch that. There wasn't there definitely wasn't an Apple TV where you could pull up iTunes and purchase it in a second and watch it, right? But there wasn't even VHS or beta at that point, or maybe they were just coming out. And so that's why he sought that.
Actually, we had VHS in those days, so just for the record,
So he remembers this world of where that didn't exist though, and so he was not worried but concerned of that, and he wanted to see that movie 11 times. The other part of that, when you get to this creation piece, is and a good friend of ours, Scott Erickson, kind of told me this story, was America's Funniest Home Videos. You remember that? Mm-hmm. It's still actually in production.
Bob Saget, I think, was the host.
Yeah.
I wonder where Bob Saget is.
I don't know.
Bob, I hope you're still alive.
But it's interesting in that was the first time, or one of the first times, where the consumer, the person watching the videos, can now create their own and share it with a very wide audience fairly easily. So you really saw the consumer becoming the creator. And the reason why I bring that up is I would very much compare it to many of these standards where the students now can and are at a point where they can create authentic content that others, students and adults, can consume to learn.
Yeah, that's. I work with librarians a lot. I mean, my background is as a librarian, and I do a lot of work with school librarians, and that's been kind of an existential shift for libraries because when I was going to school, and even when I was in college, you went to the library to get the information because at that point you did not have a browser. You couldn't Google things, and so that was the place where you went to information. So information was an event that you scheduled for, and now information is something that is
readily available.
24/7, which there's some downsides to that too, which we might discuss in a future episode. But that shift from, I think, the student as a consumer, waiting for the teacher to lecture or provide the textbook or to go to the library, to this idea of being a creator is really, really, really a powerful shift. And I think that's really only happened in the last several years, I think because of some tools coming on into the marketplace.
Absolutely. I think it's kind of a perfect storm. If you think about when did this ed tech world really impact, I guess maybe didn't impact, but when it became available to impact schools and education in a transformative way, you have smartphones coming out.
Yep.
You have cloud-based computing coming out. You have all those kind of starting to come to fruition at the same time.
Yeah.
In the late, 2008, 10, somewhere in there.
It's really happened pretty recently. That's when I was pulling up the numbers for the keynote I'm doing. Most of the, what I would consider the most transformative technologies have emerged since 2006.
Yeah.
So, the iPad, the Google Drive becoming a tool or cloud sharing.
Yeah.
And then now these smart, the voice activated smart tools.
Yeah.
I remember the days when we used to print out MapQuest directions to get someplace, and we thought that was, oh my gosh, we could go onto the computer and map any place in the world and be able to print out exactly what the step-by-step directions were. And now, of course, that's become completely obsolete.
Yeah. It's interesting too. Our current students in our schools, K-12, none of them, or all of them, I should say, all of them were born after Google came into play.
And middle school students would be Facebook. They were born around the time after Facebook has come out.
Correct. So all of our middle schools experience, Facebook was a given.
Yeah.
If you think back to that gentleman who saw Star Wars 11 times, right? And the reason why he did is they didn't have the technology to reproduce that, and our kids are coming in with a whole different context.
Yeah, we won't make any MySpace jokes, but that would be maybe a future issue.
Yeah.
So the standards. So here in Washington State, we've adopted the ISTE student standards, and there are 7 kind of core standards. I've got a great poster here that kind of brings them out here. Let's see if we can see. There we go. Oh, this is in Spanish actually. Let's do the Spanish version. Okay. So we've got they've kind of identified what the digital age learner looks like, and then we've got about 7 key areas. And so that's empowered learner, digital citizen, knowledge constructor, innovative designer, computational thinker, creative communicator, and global collaborator.
Yeah.
So they've essentially, I love the fact, one of the things I like about I love the standards, frankly. I'm a big fan of the standards. One of the things I love is that they describe what that person needs to be.
Yes.
And they describe it not in terms of the skills, but in we need our future kids to be digital citizens. We need our future kids to be innovative designers.
Correct.
And I just love that because that gets away from, what the teachers are doing and what the students need to be doing in terms of targeting kind of what that future state should look like.
Yeah.
So, we're going to hopefully have an opportunity to look at these in some more detail in the future, but we want to kind of touch on each of those. So, empowered learner, you want to take that one, and we can kind of just give a little bit of an overview of that?
Yeah, and I think this one, and there's a couple others, but I think this one really stands out to me where when I talked about students having choice or really student-directed, this is that one where the learner, the student, really has some choice over what they're learning, maybe the pace of the learning. They have a pretty significant impact on even goal setting within that. So I want to achieve this, and then they track that progress.
Yeah, I think it's great that that's the first one that they have as their
Absolutely.
standards. I'm sure that was, I would like to think that the people that develop the standards were intentional in that, because that really underpins almost everything that comes after.
Sure.
I think one of the things that's kind of interesting about that one too is that there's a implicit assumption that teachers need to allow students to be empowered. And I think that that's one of the things, in our district, we've had one-to-one devices out for now, in some cases, some of the teachers have had them for I think 5 years now. And the devices have helped move the bar forward, but there's still a lot, the teachers are still really holding on to content and control.
Changing practice is difficult. It's a process and a journey.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be one of the challenges as we move forward, is just try to figure out how to get those teachers to let go a little bit and allow students to have that. And again, it's going to be a little bit messier. If you're an empowered learner, kids are going to go in some different directions. Speaking of different directions, and then the next one is digital citizen. So most people are familiar with this idea, but in some ways, some of our political and social discourse among adults kind of raises this issue of digital citizenship. But there's just a lot of things. I'm really pleased that in our district we've been really focused on this for quite a few years now. I wouldn't say that we've kind of crossed the line in terms of every kid is really a solid digital citizen, but we've definitely thrown our shoulder into it. So digital citizen are things like safety online, the idea of kind of conceiving of what is the role, how to be careful around different kinds of strangers online. There used to be this idea around stranger danger, and the reality is that the internet is full of strangers, and we work with strangers on a daily basis, so that it's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah.
How to be responsible, how to have etiquette online, how to not be a bully online. Cyberbullying is a piece of that. But then there's also things like academic honesty, to cite sources, things like that. So that digital citizen is really kind of a big set of skills, but I think it's great that that's again part of that. The next one is knowledge constructor.
Yeah, and again, that one I think part of it goes back to student choice a little bit, in the sense that when they are, in using their words, constructing their knowledge or doing their inquiry, they have a lot of choice over what they're using, where they're finding the resources, how they are analyzing the resources, how they're compiling those resources. So it really, a lot of it goes back to, again, that choice and student directed. And again, that is a shift. That is a shift in our classrooms across, not only in our district, but all across our country.
Yeah. And again, I know there's a lot of districts that are looking at OER resources, open educational resources, as an alternative to textbooks, because with a textbook, one can argue, I guess in my mind, is that how can you be a knowledge constructor if you're working out of a textbook? And I think that there's probably ways that can be done, but I think there's some tension between those two. Yeah. But the idea of open educational resources, and then allowing both teachers and students to be able to kind of curate and select those resources is a really critical component of that one. Yeah. Innovative designer, I love this one. I think this idea of students being the maker movement, which is really big now, where students are creating robots and doing coding and that sort of thing, where there's a project-based learning component to it. There's a design element to that, and I think I love the fact this is, again, interestingly enough, going back to this idea of creation. Yes. The student as creator. As in what ways do we develop the student skill set and habits of mind so that they can be an effective designer, not only of their own learning, but of products that could be useful outside of school. Yeah,
and I think that one really plays into kind of the shift in education as a whole, too, to where the teacher had the information, they would give it to the students, and the students would recite that, and it would be right or wrong and some subjectivity in there. But when you start to design, there's an iterative process in that. So this idea that we can get better with different tries, and that failing at times is okay. It's about learning, about the learning process. So it really, this particular standard really shifts that narrative to where the students, again, have some control over what they're learning and how they respond to those wins and losses.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned the idea of failing and iteration. I think that's, again, kind of implicit in these standards. I'm not sure that, I don't have an encyclopedic memory of now what the descriptions are for these specific areas, but certainly that idea of failing and iterating and prototyping and risk-taking, I think, is really, really, really essential.
Well, and there's, I think as a society, I don't think we normally celebrate those fails. Yeah. And even as a company, oftentimes you have a profit loss, and that impacts. One of the stories that I love from Amazon is, do you remember the Amazon fire?
Yes.
Okay. It was probably one of the worst tech failures in the last 10 years, but
there's been quite a few tech failures in the last 10 years, but I'll give you that.
Do you know the assistant's name on the Amazon fire?
Tell me it was Alexa.
It was.
Oh, sweet.
So Alexa was born out of this massive failure and now leads the industry with their home type automation.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, we in schools we struggle with failure.
We do.
Teachers struggle with it. Students are taught to struggle with it. Computational thinker is the next one. I'm gonna go.
Jump in.
I've become kind of an accidental advocate for computational thinking. This is
Mark's our guru of computational thinking. Absolutely.
What happens when I go to a workshop and have an educational epiphany? Well, I become an accidental advocate for computational thinking. This is actually one that's I appreciate the fact that ISTE has included this in here based on now what I've learned over the last kind of year or so. But computational thinking is really not as much about coding as it is about kind of the habits of mind and skills that you need to be an effective coder or an effective designer. Yeah. So it talks about algorithmic thinking and about working with data, about decomposing things. I love using the word decompose in an educational context. And that's really exciting. The thing that I like about computational thinking and the way that ISTE has framed it, and others like Digital Promise as well, is that it's not just about coding, and so that there's a focus on the underlying skill set, the foundations that are necessary for students to be successful, whether they become a coder or a designer or an engineer or a writer. Yeah. And some cool stuff going on with that. Yeah. So we got two more: creative communicator.
Yeah, so the last two, creative communicator and global collaborator, is number 7. Yeah. But a lot of those start to go together. But with the creative communicator, I think it's crucial that our students are able to communicate creatively, as the standard says, in moving forward. As they're creating, as they're having this choice, they have to share that. And I think, the reason why I start to pair those two together oftentimes is you create these, whatever you're making and whatever you're going to share, there has to be a way to engage in that process with an authentic, wider audience than just the school and just your classroom. And I even think of this is a policy issue, I think, for a lot of districts as well. We try to protect our kids in that, and we have a duty to do so. But I would say with this one, you start looking at, like, if you're familiar with SAMR, and the R of SAMR, the instructional...
So SAMR is the Ruben Puentedura, Dr. Ruben Puentedura developed kind of a framework for educational transformation using technology.
Yeah, and so you start with the basic, which is substitution. Yep. You use this device to do the same you could physically. But on the top end of that, and it kind of goes through progressions, is redefinition. That's the R, and that's where I start thinking about this global collaborator and how those fit together. Oftentimes, I think some of our policies hinder that, just because we don't know yet, or we don't know how to keep things safe and still be able to authentically do this. But I think it's key for our students to have that authentic feedback in that audience and that stage to show their learning.
Yeah, I know George Kouros. Love you, George. You inspire all of us.
Yes.
So George, I know some years ago I was at a presentation and we were talking about digital citizenship. And he talked about the idea that we should stop talking about digital citizens and talking about digital leadership, I think is the phrase that he used. But the idea that we need to teach students to develop their own brand, that rather than having the footprint defined by others, that students need to have that footprint created by themselves. Yeah. And because as they look for jobs and as they move to university, that global brand, that online brand, that authentic brand is going to be something that recruiters look at. Absolutely. And they'll be kind of judged by that. Yeah. So so those are the 7. We're kind of took a quick breeze through those, but I really look forward to keeping the conversation going, getting some guests back in future episodes to kind of look at these in some detail. So with that, I think we've kind of covered the bases. I'm kind of curious where everybody else was in 1998. Maybe we can collect that in a future episode. But with that, we look forward to connecting with you next time. And again, I'm Mark Ray.
And I'm Zach Desjarlais.
And this is edX. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.